Howdy, I'm Brian Foley. I'm a criminal defense lawyer here in Conroe, Texas. I represent folks who've been charged with a crime either in Houston, Conroe, or the surrounding counties. Welcome back. We're here for another video installation of The Dirty Little Secret in Criminal Law. And it's a series where I go over a specific crime, I tell you a little bit about the crime, and then we discuss the dirty little secret that all the lawyers know about that kind of case that maybe you, the general public, doesn't know. So the first case we're going to talk about today is DWI first with a breath test. So what happens if I blow over the legal limit? 0.08 is the legal limit in Texas. And what happens if you blow over that? Well, the first question I would ask you if you were here in my office is, how was it that you were tested? Where were you when you were tested? Because that matters. If you were tested with a breath test on the side of the road, and that was the only time you had to blow into some breath testing instrument, then that's really good news, because that was called a portable breath test. They're about this big, and the number that comes out of that maybe the officer showed you is not admissible in court. If that's happened to you, think back. Did the officer say the number to you out loud, or did he just show it to you? Well, if he just showed it to you, that's because he knows that that number is going to be excluded from the trial, and he doesn't want to have to go back and doctor the video to remove the audio of it. The judge would have ordered us, the lawyers, to redact that video and remove the audio of your breath test number. That's if it's a PBT or a portable breath test. The other thing, the other place you could have been tested is at the jail. That's where the certified breath testing instrument is, and that instrument is called the intoxilizer. I know that sounds like a very silly name. I remember the first time I heard it, I thought it was straight out of a 1950s infomercial or something like that. You know, the intoxilizer 5000 was the name of the breath testing instrument back when I started. We're now up to the 9000, but it's still called the intoxilizer 9000. So that is certified by the scientific director of the state of Texas to give breath tests. And you may be asking yourself, well, did this happen in a lab? No, it didn't. It probably happened down at the jail. And that would be a little more concern. That would be a number the state could potentially get in at trial. So how does the breath test work? How does this all operate? Well, the first thing that would have happened is you would have been arrested for DWI. There's generally no unarresting you. Some people think, you know, the officer says, do you want to provide a sample of your breath? And you think, well, maybe if I blow under, maybe I get to go home. That is probably not going to be the case. The reason for that is the law says the officer cannot ask for a breath test from you until he reads you what's called the DIC-24. And the first line of the DIC-24 is, you are under arrest. You are under arrest for an offense involving acts alleged to have been committed, blah, blah, blah. You were intoxicated and in a motor vehicle or a boat or an airplane, or there's actually a DWI that you can get for assembling an amusement park ride. But that is extremely rare. I have never seen an amusement park DWI. If you have an amusement park DWI, amusement ride DWI, then please call me. I would love to handle your case. I will handle that one for free. So let's say you were taken to jail after you were read the DIC-24. You consented to a breath test, and what do they have to do then? Well, the officer is supposed to observe you for 15 minutes continuously in your presence, is what the law says. And during that 15 minutes, he needs to make sure you don't burp, you don't vomit, you don't do anything crazy with your mouth, you don't drink scope, anything like that, so that hopefully in their minds the breath test will be reliable. Well, if there's a problem with that, that's something we can attack. The other thing the officer is supposed to do is check the reference sample, which is a solution that's prepared by someone called a technical supervisor. And again, these are all things we can attack. Just because there's a number in your case, it doesn't mean that that number is accurate, and it doesn't mean that number is going to be believed by a jury or even the prosecutor during negotiations. The other thing that's going to happen is you're going to have to blow twice into this breath testing machine, the intoxilizer. They're going to ask you to breathe really, really deeply, really hard, and blow for a long time. This is so that they can get the blood, the air from your lungs that mixes with the blood. They call that alveolar breath. And very complicated stuff. It's likely the officer doesn't understand exactly how this instrument works. It is even somewhat likely that the technical supervisor who is supposed to be in charge of this instrument is not an effective witness for the state of Texas when we go to trial. So there's a lot of ways to attack a breath test. So what is the punishment for a DWI breath test case? Well, it depends on how the breath test result comes out and what is believed at trial. So let's say the breath test was a 0.10. That would be over the legal limit of 0.08, but under 0.15. And if it's in between that range, then the punishment is a Class B misdemeanor with a maximum punishment of 180 days in jail and up to a $2,000 fine. If it's above a 0.15, then that turns it into a Class A misdemeanor with a maximum jail term of 1 year, 365 days in jail, and up to a $4,000 fine. And that brings us to the dirty little secret about breath tests. So here it is. The dirty little secret about breath test cases in Texas is that there are some prosecutors who would rather try a DWI refusal than to try a breath test case with a number that's fairly high. So this is because there are so many attacks that can be levied against the breath testing by a competent defense attorney. The trial can become, for the prosecutor, really difficult and technical, and maybe they just don't want to deal with that. And so one thing they can do in a refusal case where there is no test is point at the defendant, point at my client and say, well, look, there's a reason why we don't have a number in this case. It's because he refused to give us a sample. But when there's a breath test, that means that my client has consented. That means my client knew that he wasn't intoxicated, and he knew that his number was going to come back below the legal limit. And if it weren't for the uncleanly nature of that particular machine, whose records that we subpoenaed showed that it was out of commission for a few months prior to the week before my client was arrested, if it weren't for those circumstances, he absolutely would have blown under the legal limit. And you can see how easy it is to argue against a breath test under those conditions. And so that is something that is the dirty little secret with breath test cases in Texas.